Hi guys, Geekonomics here, and today I'm going to bring you a video for those of you who are resitting F582 on Monday. So that's the AS Macroeconomics paper, and also those of you who are doing for the very first time the new A-level specification, just started in September of course, and again the AS Macro paper is on Monday. One or two of you have been messaging me and saying, will you please do something on exchange rates and the current account? So I've taken this opportunity this morning when I've got a little bit of a lull in proceedings, as it were, to bring this to you. And this will also be of great help and benefit to my GCSE students as well. So no doubt they will be tuning into this one also. So let's just crack on here with exchange rates. Exchange rates. What are exchange rates and how are exchange rates determined? This is something that was asked on the paper 2 or 3 sessions ago, so it might come up again, but you should know this anyway. Exchange rates are determined by market forces, by demand and supply, and demand and supply simply determine, just like they do for a good or a service, they determine the price. So this market forces are determining the price of the good or service in this case, but in this case it's the currency that we're talking about. So the demand curve, let's have a look at the demand curve first of all. So the demand curve, I've got a diagram here. This is all you would need in the exam with regard to labelling and so on. Simple exchange rate on the y-axis is sufficient, quantity on the x, and the demand curve sloping downwards from left to right. Now I just want to run through what the basic determinants are of the demand for a particular currency, ladies and gents. And you can see here I've listed 4. These are not the only 4, I'll mention a few more possibly, but these are the key ones. So number 1, the interest rate. Now by the interest rate, ladies and gentlemen, I mean the base rate. Now you know, having read David Smith, I'm sure, in the Sunday Times this week, you'll know that the base rate for the 86th month in a row was kept at 0.5%. So that is not going to attract people into the UK to hold UK sterling. But let's just imagine, use our imaginations. Let's just say that the base rate of interest in the UK went up from 0.5 to 10%. All around the world, investors would be looking to the UK and thinking, we want to put our money into UK sterling because it is going to yield us a much higher rate of interest. And as a consequence of that, the demand for UK sterling would go up, and it would attract what we call, what we economists call, it attracts hot money flows into the economy. Hot money, it's buzzing around the globe so fast you can't touch it. It's hot. So that's number 1. Number 2, speculators, money makers. People who think that the value of a currency is going to go up or down, and as a consequence that they will make a capital gain on it, they will make money on it. So if a speculator thought that in the near future the UK Monetary Policy Committee were going to put the base rate up, speculators would, in advance of that move, they would demand sterling. They would put all of their money into sterling. And as a consequence of that, the demand for sterling would go up. And again, that would cause this curve to shift. Thirdly, exporters. If exporters are selling out of the UK, they do not want paying in yuan or, as the sixth form we're looking at the moment, the Zambian kwacha. They don't want paying in that. They want paying in their own currency, UK sterling. So if you sell more exports, the demand for UK sterling goes up. And then finally, ladies and gentlemen, although this is not a finite list, I reiterate, foreign direct investment, FDI. Ladies and gentlemen, as you may know, I'm coming to you here on this sort of live broadcast from the northeast of England. And just down the road we have the most efficient car plant in the whole of Europe. It's called Nissan. And Nissan is a great example of foreign direct investment into the UK, sponsored of course and ultimately attracted to the UK by Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, which is tremendous. But when foreigners are building premises, recruiting labour in the UK, again, they will need to be paying for all of this in sterling, and so once again the demand for sterling would go up. So all of these factors, ladies and gentlemen, would do this. You watching? All of these factors would cause, so when I say all of these factors, rise in the base rate, more speculation, increase in exports, increased foreign direct investment. All of these factors would shift the demand curve to the right, like the hook. Demand shifting to the right. That's demand in a nutshell. Right, let's move on, ladies and gentlemen. Supply. Again, same labels, same axes, supply curve, just your normal supply curve, upward sloping, left to right. What are the key determinants? Well, the key determinants just flip the determinants of demand on their heads. So in this case, it's not the interest rates in the UK that are attractive, it's the interest rates abroad. You'll know, I'm sure, that Janet Yellen, US Federal Reserve Bank, she raised the base rate of interest in America not so long ago. And as a consequence of that, that attracted lots of investment into US dollars. Well, in order to get US dollars, bearing in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that this is the supply of sterling that we're talking about here, people would have to sell their sterling, and then with the proceeds of those sales, they then purchase the dollar. So an increase in base rates abroad would lead to a sell-off of sterling. That increases the supply of sterling into the market, and the supply curve would shift to the right. Number two, speculators. Speculators thought it was better, let's say, to hold US dollar than UK sterling. What would they do to their holdings of UK sterling? Sell them. What would that do to the supply of sterling on the Forex, that's the foreign exchange markets? The supply of sterling would shift to the right. Point three. Not export demand, import demand this time. Why? Think about it. Let's say we want to buy things from the United States of America. So what do we need to pay for them in? We need to pay in USDs, US dollars. How do we get the US dollars? We sell our UK sterling. With the proceeds we buy US dollars. Again, sterling supply of shifting right. And finally, FDI. Who's making the FDI this time? It's the UK, or residents in the UK, or businesses in the UK investing into the United States. How will they pay for the labour, pay for the land, pay for the capital in the United States? They'll have to pay in dollars. How will they get the dollars? They'll sell sterling and buy USDs. All of those factors, ladies and gents, as just described, would shift the supply curve to the right. Comme ça. So that then brings us to our exchange rate determination. Here it is. Supply, demand, your equilibrium exchange rate, and quantity. Let me just mark those points on for you, ladies and gentlemen. There's our equilibrium. There's the value of the exchange. And there's the quantity. So if you're asked in the exam, two things. Number one, how are exchange rates determined? By market forces, demand and supply. If you're then asked to draw a diagram, voila, there is your diagram. And if you're asked to identify and explain one or two of the factors which will cause the supply curve and or the demand curve to shift, we've just discussed them. Right, let's now move on, because there's a clear link between exchange rates and the current account of the balance of payments. And I should have mentioned something about this, ladies and gents, but I'll come back to that later. Right, the current account of the balance of payments. Note, ladies and gents, the new terminology just introduced. Note it. Note it here. Note it well. NB. Nota bene. The current account is made up of four components. Trade in goods. What do I mean by trade? I mean the import and export of. Trade in services. The import and export of. We used to talk about net property income from abroad and current transfers. Look, we no longer discuss those. The new terms are, for net property income from abroad, it's primary income, and for current transfers, it's secondary income. So, in the exam, if you really want to impress the examiner and you get a question on current account, use the new terminology. Next point, a trade deficit. A trade surplus. Note well, it's trade. It's not budget, it's trade deficit, trade surplus. And the other thing which people often get wrong here is they talk about the quantity of exports, the quantity of imports. No, 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 it is the values. Values, values, values all the time. If you've got a trade deficit, the value of exports are less than the value of your imports. So in other words, there's more money leaving your economy than coming in. Alternatively, trade surplus, value of exports greater than the value of imports. Make sure that you know that, and please, I beg you, do not talk about trade deficit, trade surplus if the question is about budgets, fiscal policy, because then once you start along that road, ladies and gentlemen, it's like lemmings. You know, you walk to the end of the pier and you start walking off the pier. Now, in the excuse me for the buzzer here, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for these interruptions. Right, in the exam, you may then get an essay question which asks you to evaluate. Remember, your key directive word in your exams is going to be evaluate. That's what's going to be in the essay question. And you might get a question which says something along the lines of, evaluate the extent to which a depreciation of a currency can improve a trade deficit position, or something along those lines. So I want to talk to you about how you would answer that, diagrams that you could use, and then the evaluation that you could use at the end of it. So, what's a trade deficit? We know. Value of imports greater than the value of exports. What's the policy to cure a trade deficit? Well, one of those policies is to depreciate the nation's currency. Now, why would that work? I'll tell you why it will work. Because, and please note this, if you don't know this, just learn it verbatim. The price of an export always moves in the same direction as a currency. If you learn that and remember it, you'll not go far wrong in the exam. So you depreciate the currency. What happens to the price of the export? It falls. Now, imports, imagine I have a coin here, ladies and gentlemen. Look, I've just flipped it. It was on exports, and I've caught it again, and it's on the other side, and it's imports. Imports are the flip side of the same coin. So when export prices fall, import prices will rise. What will happen to the demand? Well, when the price of exports falls, the demand for the exports will go up. I was saying, ceteris paribus, that's what I was saying, wasn't it? The price of the exports fall, the demand for exports rise, price of imports rise, demand for imports fall. Now, that is all ceteris paribus. In other words, all other things remaining equal. So, by that what we mean is, let's say for example the price of exports fall, what other factors that might happen across the globe might prevent the demand for exports rising? Well, let's say for example incomes abroad fell. That would mean that actually the demand for exports might not go up. So we must assume ceteris paribus in our economics models. Now this whole policy, ladies and gentlemen, this is known as external devaluation. And it's also referred to as an expenditure switching policy, because the whole point of it is to get people to switch their spending from expensive imports to cheaper domestically produced goods and services. What diagram could you draw for this? Well, I suggest to you, remember AD, C to the I to the G to the X minus M. We're talking about an increase here in the X minus M component. So we'd be anticipating an increase in AD, and so obviously you'd be looking at drawing something like this, where AD is shifting from AD1 to AD2, and you can go into it and analyse it. And remember, Elizabeth Ring, what did she say about analysis? Explain these diagrams to the absolute nth degree. Really go into them. You use your connectives and so on when you're explaining these diagrams. So that would be an appropriate diagram. And then you need to, obviously, once you've done your analysis, you then need to evaluate. Now your evaluation should be along the lines of, well, tell me why the depreciation of the currency might not actually work. And I've listed just 4 things here. Remember, in your evaluation, you really need 3 things well explained. That's probably about sufficient. This is not a finite list. There are others. I'm sure you can think of others. Number 1, your export prices might be cheaper, but the quality might be horrendous. Nobody wants them. Number 2, people do not realise instantaneously that the price of the exports have fallen, and so there is a bit of a lag time here with regard to the depreciation of the currency, and it filters through the markets, particularly to the consumers market. Thirdly, very important one, I would always try and get this one in, price elasticity of demand. If the price elasticity of demand, let's say for your export, is very inelastic, like so, well, if you reduce the price, even by a large amount, you'll only get a tiny change in the quantity. So you might not get sufficient increase in quantity demanded. And fourthly, as we've mentioned previously, if the price of your export falls, but foreign economies are going through recession, then they probably won't be able to afford to buy your goods and services. And again, this will mean that this policy might not be successful. Now, a great evaluative comment to put at the end of this, ladies and gentlemen, would be to discuss a better alternative, which in the short term, it's like taking a nasty medicine. It's very unpleasant, but in the longer term, it might be longer lasting. And we refer to this as internal devaluation, rather than this one, the depreciation, which is referred to as external devaluation. So internal devaluation means hammer down on wages and get your labour force more productive, train them, skill them, perhaps force them to work harder. And as a consequence of that, although, obviously you and I, we would feel a cut in our wages, we obviously don't feel a cut in the exchange rate. So this is quite painful. Politically, this is not a very sensible thing to do, especially in the run-up to an election or something. But in the long term, this is what is best. Germany, for example, did this in the 1990s, and now, of course, it's the engine of the Eurozone. So it does work, but in the short term, it's a painful medicine. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of this one. I hope you've enjoyed it. Remember, as ever, keep watching, keep subscribing. If you've any questions, do send me a message and I'll do my very best to get back to you. Hope the revision's going well.